Hi, I want to talk about something fundamental in all kinds of movement, but especially something that is important in swordsmanship, which most people do not seem to be aware of today, which they were in a lot of the more, let's say, ancient times, historic times. I'm talking about Newton's third law, which states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if I were to be floating in a vacuum, if I wanted to move in some direction, I would need to either kick off against the surface, something very massive, like this wall here, which is essentially the entire mass of this building, to push myself in this direction, or then I would need to have some kind of object, let's say this glass, and I would have to throw it some direction. And for the equal amount of energy that the glass is moving in that direction I'm throwing it into, my body would be moving into the opposite direction. But because my body is much more massive, it's heavier than the glass, I would be moving much slower. So usually we really don't know this kind of effect on ourselves, but it's omnipresent. Excuse me. For example, when we walk, most people probably don't really think about this, but when we walk, our hands swing in opposite time with our legs. That is because the movement of this arm swinging like this counteracts the movement of this leg going the other direction, allowing us to push forward and keep balanced. A little bit exaggerated. Now, in fencing, a lot of fencers really try to root themselves to the ground. They try to have a very wide stance so that they don't get moved by their sword, so that they can hit harder from that position. And I think that is kind of going against the grain and not utilizing a massive potential resource, which is clearly present in a lot of the historical systems, both in Japan and in Europe. I really became aware of this when I started to practice a little bit of Kendo and tried out some of the training methods they have there, specifically suburi swings, and with doing those with a suburito, which would be a suburi sword. I actually have a wooden bokuto here, and then I have a suburito, and there's a pretty considerable difference between these with how much longer the suburito is compared to the bokuto, the wooden sword, and in how thick it is. So this thing is considerably more massive, and that has certain effects on how you use it. Some people, I'm not going to deny it, but some people seem to think that using the suburito for training is to develop muscle power. I don't think that's a good idea, because when you perform lots and lots of swings with a heavy sword, you're not putting all that much exertion on your muscles as you are putting strain on your ligaments and joints. So you are more likely to wear down your body than you are to build up muscle. So I don't think that's a very good use of a tool like this. Instead, I believe that this thing is supposed to teach you how to sense the effects of a sword on your movements. What do I mean by that? Well, the suburi swing, which I mentioned earlier, let's see if I get my feet back to this picture, because you kind of need to see the interaction between the sword and the feet. So a suburi swing is something like this. Now what's happening there is, as I step forward, I raise the sword above my head, and when I swing down, the rear leg closes. And what's happening there is, every time the sword moves, the leg moves, and they're kind of balancing each other out. But in addition to that, the sword moving moves my body. So if I want to go backwards, I push myself off with the sword. If I want to go forward, I pull myself forward. You can think of it like a should have brought it out earlier, but can do it like a rope. I have this rubber band. If I want to go forward, I can pull on it. And if I want to go backwards, I can pull on it. And in opposition, you could think of it like an oar. I'm going to use a stick. If I want to pull myself forward, I can use an oar to move myself as a lever. That's the extent of my understanding of how to do it in Japanese fencing, Kendo, kenjutsu. But I believe it's what it's there for. And I base this on trying to decipher the characters used to write the words suburi and suburito. And it's something like fundamental movement training sword. So I don't think it's used for training muscles. I think it's used for making yourself more aware and sensitive to how the sword affects your own movement. So when you're doing the basic swings in Kendo, you are more in tune with the timing of the movements and how you're not trying to fight your own movements by being in the wrong timing of the swing. Now in Western fencing, where there's a lot more lateral and diagonal movement than in modern Kendo, I think it has a much more interesting effect in that, let me grab a long sword, short is long sword, but a long sword, in that a lot of the techniques in historical contexts seem to use this principle. You can use it in two ways. You can use it to push yourself, you can use it to push off or to boost a movement. So you are using it from a position of strength, throwing it, and then you follow and you kind of cash out on that movement. So you're throwing it and then you're pulling yourself towards it. I'll explain the latter a little bit more in detail later. But for the first example of pushing yourself off the weapon to move in another direction, think of Kung Pao. How does the Kung Pao work? You're moving off the line. Let's say you are thrusting against me. You go right-handed for a second. You are thrusting against me, and I want to move off the line and attack you. Well, I can do that by stepping off the line and attacking you. That's kind of slow. What if instead I use the sword as a lever to push myself off in the same instant I step? I think I've tried this out. I don't remember exactly how I tested it, but I tried to do sideways jumping over a line to move my body over a line on the floor for something like, I think it was 30 seconds. And I was trying to do it without a sword and with a sword, and then with the side swings using a krump to move myself. So I was trying to jump over a line like this, with the sword extended, and then finally using the sword to move myself as a lever. And I found there was a slight advantage to using the sword within 30 seconds, like 3 or 4 more jumps. But that's not a huge difference because I'm jumping back and forth. But it demonstrates that you can use the muscles of your upper body to assist the movements of your lower body. Like if you think about an amateur's understanding of how fencing works, it would be that you only cut with the arms and you only move with the legs. But in reality, you use your whole body to do everything. You cut with your entire body and you move with your entire body. And I think this is an approach advocated by the masters of old. For example, in Fiore's, I believe it's the armored section of fencing with a sword, he has multiple for Porta di Ferro Mezana. So there's Porta di Ferro and Mezana, so the half-open gate. He has the same guard for longsword in armor, and then I believe for the axe. I don't think he has it for spear. I think he has something else for spear. But anyhow, in the armor section of the longsword, he mentions a kind of application of the technique where he explains that you step off the line and then you thrust. And the way he explains it is you step with this foot there. And this is based on him using that same kind of language in a later section with spears. And there's a follow-up picture showing which way it's supposed to be. And that confirms that he, I read the whole manual and tried to understand exactly what he means when he says something a certain way. And he says that you should step with this foot over there to counter an attack. So you go like that. Now, if you do it without the sword, it's quite slow. Because standing like this, my feet are creating tension in two different ways. This foot is creating tension into that direction. I can step back, but I can't really go that way with this foot. I can't push off that way. Similarly, this foot here is pushing into that direction. I can step to the side, go forward, but I can't really go that way. Because this foot is not pushing, you can't push me in that direction. To go into that direction, I would first need to go over this leg by pushing with this foot, and then push that direction. There's a slight lag. I have to go forward and then to the side. I can't push in that direction from this direction without a sword, because using the sword, I can do this kind of motion, which it's a pull. Same with the rope, as I showed earlier. Back. In having this rope here, I can overcome that initial resistance much quicker and go to that direction. And I can do that with this lever called a sword. As I move the sword moves me. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So I can overcome this initial bump to come to that side. If you compare having the sword like this, there's a slight delay, there's a slight resistance, a bump in the beginning, compared to and I think he also explains this in quite some detail in his own words in the spear section, where he explains that the whole art of using the spear is stepping off the line with a beat, parrying his weapon, and then attacking. So he's explaining it in terms he understands, because this is pre-Newton. This is several hundreds before Newton. And Newton codified that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So they're using terms that they understand in their time. I think this explains why, for example, we don't see this is bothering me. We don't see in modern HEMA, for example, the Krumpau used. Because modern HEMA really is enamored, fascinated, obsessed with being stationary. It's an effect of modern footwear. When you are used to having perfect grip on the floor at all times, you're not used to sliding around and being moved and jostled by nature, by circumstance, by your weapon. So you're always, you see people like, they're used to like perfect stationary and then attack, and then it's perfectly controlled. They're not allowing themselves to be moved by the sword. At least I'm not seeing it. So you think of like the Krumpau as it's used, it will be something like this. Or maybe you step and then. But in reality, it should be that you are being moved by the sword. If you think of it as a the Krumpau is against the high thrust in Littenauer's heuristic system. It's the method you should use against someone who is in a high guard with a point forward. That is to say, a high thrust. So how do you counter a high thrust? Well, you move forward. I'm coming towards you. Thrust. And then when you see the movement, you counter it with a sidestep. You're moving off the line and attacking at the same time. And in doing that, let's say the central line is here. You can't see, but central line is here. I can move very fast off the central line, avoiding a thrust. So the Krumpau works because you are pushing yourself with the sword away from the attack. I'm getting very excited. What else had I written about this? I've been thinking about trying how to explain this. This sort of... I feel like a mad hermit sometimes. But, yeah, let's see. Spear and axe, yes. Porta di Ferro Mezana, rope or oar. I think this also applies to... this applies to every movement you can do. Every movement. Like, it informs the way you're supposed to thrust. But if you thrust with a step and then a thrust, at this point when you're extending your sword, you are pushing yourself back against the sword. That doesn't work. So you should thrust from a position of strength and leverage, extending and throwing the sword out. You're throwing the sword forward and then following. And as you step, the sword is actually pulling you a little bit because you're throwing a weight forward and it's going forward even if you are not going forward. So when you are going forward, it's pulling you a little bit. So I've noticed that when I thrust with a heavier sword, or a heavier weapon like a spear, it goes a little bit further than just without. Not just the reach of the weapon, but my actual step, because it's pulling me forward. And like, why is Kniekel so common in my my system? Why is it so common to continue a blow with a Unterhof from below? Well, it's because when you perform Unterhof, Zwerg from below, a kind of Unterhof, because when you're doing it from here, against a line, let's see, I have this door here, can you see it? No, you can't. When you are in a bind, and then from here, you want to go to the other side, if you perform a Zwerg Unterhof, you're being pulled into that direction. It allows you to, not just with your feet, but also with the sword, to change the line of attack, change your angle towards the opponent. It's like literally every movement you perform in swordsmanship should be informed by this fundamental principle. It's a fundament. It's a fundament. Okay, let's calm down again. And yeah, I think this is really what makes a sword special. You can do it with a spear and an axe. You can do it really well, but you can't do it continuously. See, when you have a bigger lever, the spear here, you can do it once, maybe twice. Okay, that's about it. But with a sword, when you are not limited by having a huge excess length here, but with the weight being here and this leverage affecting your torso with this perfect ratio, you can do all sorts of continuations. It flows continuously. So the sword has a higher potential for changing the line on the opponent. And the closer you get to them with a shorter weapon, the more that line change affects how well they're able to respond to you. So if you can use this to not just be able to slightly change your angle, but change your angle a lot, you can attack from a completely unexpected angle. And it's completely changed the way I see how the sword is used. And why, for example, when Meyer says that the Zwerg is like half the art, that makes perfect sense. Because in the Zwerg, like, why do the Japanese so get hung up on the big men, the kiryoshi? Like, I can't do it indoors, but like, why are they so fucking enamored with having this biggest possible movement? Why not just a small swing? Because when you make it as big as possible, this lever is maximized in relation to your center of mass. The further away you move the sword from your body, the bigger this lever is, and the more it can affect this center of mass moving. So in the crump, you extend your hands, and then you do the movement. And the heavier the weapon is, the bigger the more you can do it. It's sublime. It's just, I realize that. So, where was I going with this? It's just, I've been trying to put this into words like coherent explanation, but it's just so universal. It's so fundamental. It's so, okay, what else? Trying to tie this up. Okay, why would this be lost if it's so important? Why don't we know about this today? Well, I think that's simple. The training tools of today are too light. In fencing, I don't have a fencing sword. Modern Olympic fencing. I have a rapier, but it's in the closet. I'm not going to take it out. Modern fencing foil or an epee or whatever. They're too light. No matter how you move it, you're not going to feel it. It's too light for safety reasons. You move it like this, you don't feel it at all. You move it like this, you're not going to feel it at all. But what is the timing for a good thrust? It doesn't really matter because it's so light. Same thing with Kendo shinai. The bamboo swords are so light that no matter how you swing it, you're not going to feel at all the effect it has on your body. Hence, this kind of tool would be made, not for muscle training, but to make you aware that, hey, if you are using an actual sword, you have to be aware of how it pulls and pushes you. Which is why they have, I would say, several types of suburi training. So when you have a real sword, this thing is stiff. It's a perfect lever. It is much stiffer than a Western longsword. So when you use it as a lever, it's extremely effective. So you have the regular suburi. We also have haya suburi. So it's the basic. And it's like push and pull. There's a rope and an oar. It's like literally every kind of movement. Thrusts, strikes, parries. Oh, parries. If I want to move away from a strike from that direction, which is why I believe the Japanese parry is what it is. Like they have the children, and then the parries like this. They're pulling the tip towards themselves, so when the strike comes, they move. Strike comes, they move past the tip, so they can't be exchanged on the other side and thrust. So they're moving forward, and they're moving themselves off the line, if they're doing that. So the Japanese parry, start to this side. You are moving that direction, getting off the line, and going slightly forward. So the tip can't just change the line and come and counter your attempt to parry them, or however you want to say that. Kronhau, Fiore. So you're not, it's a breve, you do Kronhau, and then you do something from there. Defensive applications. Why would you fight from Fenestra? Well, because you can step aside. You can close your entire body line, the entire line of your body, with one movement as you step to the side. And then the Chinai. It's like fundamental. Suffusing literally every aspect. Oh yes, I was supposed to explain charging up. So if you can go further with a thrust, or if there's like let's say there's Figueiredos. How do you say his name? Figueiredos, the greatsword guy. He has I believe it's rule 14. He explains basically a pirouette. You're like, why would you do a pirouette? Well, you're trying to avoid a longer reach weapon, and you need to get the hell off the line. And this is something you also see in Japanese martial arts. There's this, what's the YouTube channel? Asayama Ichiden Ryu, I think. Yeah, Asayama Ichiden Ryu. They have a pretty big channel on YouTube nowadays, and they're doing lots of content. And they had this Muto So no sword technique video, 2 of them I think. And one of them he's doing a spin to avoid a sword but he's barehanded. Well, same principle as used in a great sword against a spear. And what they do there is, let's see if I can have enough space to do it here. You start off in what I would call Porta di Ferro. And you swing once to avoid. Move. I haven't moved, but like, okay. So you do once, and then you do twice, and then you thrice. And that pirouette there is only possible with a sword pulling me. If it's not there, I have to do a big motion with my hands to enable it, because my feet can't really do that kind of properly, because I can't really see what's going on there. It's just my hips are destabilized. But if I have a sword there, continuation. And Oscar, virtual Fechtschule, did a video about this, I think just today, which inspired me to make this video finally. And he's doing it there with a greatsword. And that movement is possible because the greatsword is pulling him. Without the greatsword, it's a lot more difficult to do. So you're charging up a movement that would normally be a little bit difficult by throwing the sword in a position of strength so that it pulls you through the position of weakness. It's fundamental, literally everything. I had written here that I should perform sign hops for 1 minute without the sword, Fong Tog, held out front, and then finally Krumpao. But I really don't want to. I've already showered once today, and I'm already... yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm gonna... If you want to test it out, take a sword, take 2 swords, put one on the ground, and then time for a minute. How many jumps can you make? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's a little bit laborious. And then try with now my top is not moving as much. That's because the sword is keeping me a little bit stationary. But my silhouette is roughly getting over the cross. And if I would not be doing a crump completely sideways, I would do a little bit forward. Away. So I'm closing the line and doing the crump. Yeah. It's a pretty interesting finding. It's something that's obviously been something they've been aware of for a long time, and then it's just been forgotten. And I don't think people today really understand that, like are aware of it. And I think they should be, because it's like it informs everything. It's a fundament. Okay. Enough of me being crazy today. Yeah. Bye.